The Michigan Man Podcast, episode 154. A great run by Michigan basketball ends in heartbreak in Atlanta as the Wolverines fall to Louisville. On today's show, we take a final look back at Monday night's classic national championship game. This is the Michigan Man Podcast. On GBMW, Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. For Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Well, in a game that has already been dubbed a classic, Michigan's season came to an end, as we all know by now, on Monday night against a rugged and athletic Louisville team. 27 million viewers tuned in to watch a game that truly lived up to its billing. It was a game that was played at breakneck speed and kept us glued to the set and biting our nails, if you were me, until the young Wolverines finally just ran out of time. So it goes, but what a ride it was this season. It was a great season for Coach John Beilein and this young Wolverine team. They and we should be very proud of them. Now, we wait and see who stays and who goes, so it should be an interesting couple of weeks. We're getting today's show up a day late because the game ended so late on Monday and all of the writers and the media were in transit home on Tuesday and Wednesday. Next week, we'll be back on our regular schedule with our spring football wrap-up show, so please don't forget to join us for that. But today we're going to do our national championship game post-mortem. MLive's Wolverine basketball beat writer Nick Baumgardner was with this team all year, at home, on the road, in the locker room, and through the thrilling NCAA tournament run. He joins us next on Michigan Gameday with his thoughts on what happened Monday night down in Atlanta. Here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. Back with us on Michigan Game Day to talk about the national championship game, Nick Baumgardner from MLive. Nick, great to have you back on the show.
Thanks, Mike. Glad to be here.
Well, I know, Nick, you just got off the plane, and it's been a whirlwind last few weeks, whirlwind season, so I know you're just getting your breath. But it's not often that a national championship game, Nick, lives up to the hype. And you don't have much time between Saturday night and the semifinals and then the national championship game to hype it, but I think everyone can agree that the Michigan-Louisville matchup did just that. It lived up to the hype, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was kind of the game everyone wanted when they figured out, what the Final Four was and who was going to be there, and that looked like it was going to be maybe the more entertaining game if those two teams made it. And I'd say everyone was right. I think that they got exactly what they kind of came there for, which was a very up and down, fast-paced game with both teams making shots, both teams playing above the rim, both teams, dunking in each other's faces and all this type of thing. Just a lot of talent out there. I know the Michigan players said afterwards that was probably the most intense game they've ever been a part of, and maybe the most fun game they've ever been a part of, just because everyone out there was so good. And I think that was one takeaway from it. Obviously, Louisville's just a little bit better, and they proved that there in the last 10 minutes of the game and just pulled away.
Well, let's talk about that game for just a couple of minutes then, Nick. One of the things that comes to mind is even though Spike Albrecht played out of his mind in the first half, which we can all agree, Trey sitting on the bench with 2 fouls. Were you kind of surprised that Coach Beilein kept Trey out of the game for that long stretch? I think it was 11 minutes, as long as he did?
No, because he's done it before. He did that, I'll tell you the story. I don't know if anybody remembers this. He did that last year when Trey was a freshman at Iowa, and at that time it cost them the game. Trey had got 2 fouls early in the game, and he pulled him out, and they didn't have a backup, if you remember back then. They had no one else. So Iowa made a run. They got up like 15 points, and Beilein did not put him back in the game. And I think he regretted it afterward. He never really admitted that he regretted it, but you could kind of tell that that was a problem. I think he should have put him back. He thought he should have put him back in to kind of stem that run or what have you. Yesterday, Monday, it was more of a Trey was on the game and Spike was exploding. I mean, he had 17 points. They were up by 12. Louisville starts to make that run at the end of the half, but it was so quick. And it was one of these things where it was like a lightning fast run, and then it was something where you look at the scoreboard, you're like, okay, well, it was a 1-point game. So you're like, yeah, you blew your lead, but it's a 1-point game, and you played the whole first half without your All-American, and then you're going to get him in the second half, and you're going to get him fresh with no more foul trouble. So if they put him back in there with 2 fouls, Louisville's a smart enough team, and Pitino's a smart enough coach to where they're going to go at him. They're going to try and draw a third one, and then really take him out of the game. So I don't think he regretted it. That's just what he does, and that's who he is. That's the coach he's been. If you get 2 fouls, you're not going back in the first half, and unless it's a total disaster and 1-point game at halftime, I think that he was okay with that.
Yeah, I think the people have to remember that Coach Beilein in the past, that's pretty much the way he's always coached.
Sure.
You get your second foul, you're going to sit. I think that foul sort of scared Coach Beilein too, because that wasn't much of a foul, that second one they called on Trey, and he thought, hey, with 11 minutes left, if we leave him in there, if he picks up a quick third, then we're in big trouble.
Right, then the game's over. I mean, almost, because you have to take him out, and then you have to really be careful with him in the second half, and he wouldn't be able to play, as aggressively as maybe you'd like to. And like you said, I mean, there was a couple touchy type things where they were letting guys. It wasn't that there were bad calls necessarily sometimes, but they were letting guys play. And if you got in their way and kind of bumped them, they were going to call a foul. And that's kind of how basketball's supposed to be called. Maybe that's why the game is so entertaining, instead of some of the stuff we see sometimes in January, February, where they just, guys are just banging into each other and nothing's getting called. But I think he was just nervous about it, and again, that's just what he does. I mean, that's just what he does. He understands. He wants guys in the second half. He's going to extend games with. You saw, and the best I can explain this is everyone saw it against Kansas, where it was a 10-point game with 3 minutes to go, and they still found a way to get back and win the game. The way Beilein coaches and the way he prepares his teams, if they hang in, no lead, 10 points or 11 points, if they can hang around to something like that, even if it's not that bad, they can get back in it and win. And I know he understands that, and he understands that he has to have all hands on deck with 6-7 minutes to go in the game.
Well, watching it on TV, Nick, I thought Louisville was as quick a team as I've seen this year. It was just a frenetic pace that they play at, and a lot of Michigan's players after the game said the same thing. They are just very quick. Is that how you saw it too? Yeah,
they're quick and they're tough. I mean, that Peyton Siva. I remember I actually covered a game back in a former life with when Peyton Siva was I believe a sophomore. And I remember thinking, this guy's terrific. I mean, he was just terrific. Getting to the basket, getting in the lane, taking contact, and finishing. And you saw in the second half, he did that about 4 times in a row, and just blew by everybody, got to the baskets, kind of slipped it around and either dumped it off to somebody or had a nice layup. And then, Russ Smith's probably the quickest player in the country. He didn't have a great game, but he's running and he's making things happen with his feet, obviously. But then the thing that really separated for me was their bigs, who are also quick. Shane Bohannon and then Gorgie Jang. Bohannon he looked like Charles Barkley almost out there in a way. I mean, he is, he's that 6'6", 260-pound guy who just they could not move, they could not do anything with. He was explosive at the basket, especially in the second half. And he was against him against Glenn Robinson, and they're the same height. And Bohannon had about 40 pounds on Glenn, and Glenn just could not do anything with him. He couldn't move him out of the way. They couldn't get help over there to help him out, especially with McGarry in foul trouble. And, to me, the game for Louisville was won on the glass in the second half. They had 10 or 11 offensive rebounds after halftime, out rebounding Michigan 20-10. And, like I said, with McGarry on the bench, they just couldn't do anything about it.
Well, Nick, in a game that featured big-time players all over the place, there was 2 guys off the bench that nearly stole the show. Hancock for Louisville, Spike Albrecht for Michigan. Mm-hmm. Both of their performances were simply amazing, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and Hancock's done that a little bit before. He did that on Saturday, actually. And he's a good player who's done that a few times over the season for Louisville. Spike, who was a good player in his own right, has never done that before. That was one of those things where I remember I tweeted during the game, maybe after he had like 13 points or something like that, but I tweeted something about, Spike's going to wake up tomorrow, win or lose, and he's going to realize that this actually did happen. This wasn't a dream that he's living through, and it was just one of those, win, lose, or draw, just a stretch of play for him that he will never forget. And, maybe he'll never have it again. I'm sure Michigan hopes he will, but just an unbelievable, run there from a kid who's just so confident. I mean, and that's really what I always go back to. He can play, and, he was open, and Louisville just kind of wasn't respecting some of the stuff he can do, I think. I think you had to know he can make shots, if he was there and he was open, and he did, but he was going to the basket, he was dribbling through traffic, and, the one thing I'll say about Spike is he obviously doesn't have the tools that a Trey Burke has physically and all those sort of things, but he certainly has the confidence. There isn't anything that rattles that guy. I remember we saw that when they played Ohio State on the road the very first time, when they were getting just, they were getting dominated in that game, and nobody was doing anything. Guys looked nervous, they looked scared, they were in a panic, and then, Beilein puts Spike in the game, and he scores like six points and dribbles right through everybody, and it looked like it was no big deal. So a very cool and calm player who, just kind of blew up at the right time for them, kept them in the game, and really got them a lead. But, I think moving forward, I think Beilein and Lavelle Jordan, those guys, they love the fact that they were able to get Spike, and I think they're going to see him as a very valuable asset moving forward.
No, I think you're absolutely right about that. Well, Nick, there were complaints after the game by fans, on a lot of the blogs and sites about the officiating. And, it looked to me like they let both teams play. And, yeah, there were some questionable calls. There are always going to be. But overall, both teams really hammered away at each other, didn't they? This was a physical game.
Yeah, it was a physical game. It was two really, really good teams kind of going at each other. There were a couple calls here and there that were questionable. But and the one that always sticks out, and the worst one probably was the Burke block on Siva that they called the body and they called the foul on, which I just thought was, I don't know, it was a bad call. I mean, I don't think anybody could look at that again and say, how do you what are you doing? And then really what made it worse was, I think at the time it was a 3-point game or a 2-point game, I can't remember offhand now, but it was a momentum swing. If Trey had blocked the shot, Michigan got the ball back, went down and scored, it would either have been a 1-point game or a tie, I think, at the time. And instead, he goes to the line, makes it a 5-point game, and there's 5 minutes to go, and it was one of those things where it kind of just, I don't want to say it broke Michigan's back, but it pushed it over the top to where it was, this is going to be a little bit harder to come back from, or a lot harder to come back from. But overall, I don't know if I would blame the loss or a win from either team on officiating. I don't think it was that bad. I mean, there were some questionable calls here and there, but I think by and large, they did okay. And I think from the games we saw, by and large, the officiating in the tournament was pretty good. And I don't think you can complain too much. I think they let guys they let guys play to a degree, but they didn't let it get so out of hand that guys were just physically beating the death out of each other. Like sometimes we see in Big Ten play where it becomes a wrestling match and you can't do anything about it. I feel like they called the game well. They made some mistakes, but for the most part, I thought it was, in this tournament, especially the Final Four, I thought they did a nice job.
Nick, even though the game was played in a football venue, which normally I don't like, but that's the way it's going to be. But at least on TV, it looked and it sounded like it was a big game crowd that was really into the game for a change. Talk about that atmosphere.
Yeah, it was terrific. I mean, it was, and you're right. That's what you worry about, and that's with those football stadiums. And in Dallas, I know, even the Kansas game when Michigan made that big explosion and came back in, it just did not feel like a major event. It didn't feel like a big time crowd or whatever, and it was so kind of a dull buzz the whole time. It just was kind of it didn't feel like it was a big time event. Final Four though at the Georgia Dome. The Georgia Dome is a little bit smaller than Cowboy Stadium, but it did. The crowd, especially for the championship game, was into it from 20 minutes before the game started all the way through the very end. I mean, every single play was, an explosion in there. And it just, anyone who paid the awful price, whatever it was, to get in there and watch that thing, I think will probably always remember that crowd was just on all night long. And it really did have the feel of a championship game. It had the feel of a somebody's going to walk out of here with a trophy, and this is a really big deal. And that's what it felt like from start to finish. And not always, like you said, not always do you get that where it lives up to it. And it really did. And it was a fun game to, sit down there and, watch all the way through.
Our guest on Michigan Game Day is Michigan basketball beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive.com. And again, we appreciate Nick coming on with us today because he's just gone through an exhausting whirlwind in the last few weeks covering this team. Nick, there was no question both teams gave everything they had. They didn't leave a thing on the floor Monday night. And if anyone was nervous going into that game, any of the kids, you really couldn't tell. But to me, what was the most impressive thing that Michigan fans can take away from Monday's game is we went in there with a young team. We didn't give an inch until the clock ran out. These young guys came up big on the big stage, which doesn't always happen. Was a little short in the end, but they still came up big time, didn't they?
Oh, yeah. I don't think that nerves or anything ever played a role. I think Louisville was just kind of, like I said earlier, I think they were the better team. But, some of the stuff before the game, some people had, some analysts had said maybe, they were picking Louisville because they thought Louisville's defense was going to rattle Michigan. And I just kind of laughed at that and said, this team hasn't been rattled, but I think I've seen them rattled twice all year. And the only two times I remember them being, to a point where it was like, wow, this is maybe too much for them, it was at Michigan State and at Ohio State, which was two games that, those crowds wanted blood, and it was the most intense atmospheres maybe we've been in all season. But they just never, those kids, as time went on, they learned so many different quirky, weird little lessons throughout the season. Karis LeVert getting burned on that Ben Bruss three-pointer with the foul. I mean, that's invaluable, and it cost them a game. But the way I think Beilein looked at it was, that's an invaluable lesson for Karis LeVert that he wouldn't have learned any other way. And if we're going to make a run, he has to know, how to play in certain games. And then when you go back and you look in Kansas game, Beilein puts him back in the game at the end. You remember Kansas inbounds the ball, they're coming down the court, down 2. They have a chance to win it with about 7 seconds to go. And Karis is guarding the ball handler. And you're thinking, is this going to happen again? Not only does he not foul him, but he plays tremendous defense, they get a stop, and they win the game. And it's one of those things, and that's just one example of several, that he put them in those situations throughout the year. Michigan played an entire season with a target on its back. It's a highly ranked team. So every game they played was a massive game for their opponent, no matter what. And that's extremely valuable experience. This is just how these guys, every environment was like this for them to a degree all season long. And when they got down to that, that final stage into the Final Four, and before they played Syracuse, and a lot of the Syracuse guys were, we have more experience, and that's going to be a big deal. I just kept thinking, it's probably not going to be, because they just had gone through a season that they all played, they were all in, they've seen it all already in 1 year. They saw a ton in 1 year. There wasn't much they hadn't lived through, and the stage was never too big. And they did not lose that game because they were too young or didn't have enough experience. That's not why they lost. They lost because Louisville was better. And that's kind of a scary proposition. I don't know who's all coming back, but I'll tell you, if they get a majority of them back, that would be a scary, scary basketball team.
You're right about that. And Nick, when you put things in perspective, when the regular season ended and then the Big Ten tournament, most Michigan fans were saying, a nice run in the tournament would make everyone happy. The farther they went, though, the higher expectations rose. But do you think as time goes by, this run will be remembered as the end of the Trey Burke-led era, or more the resurgence of the Michigan program back on the national scene and, once again perceived as a relevant program?
That's the thing that I guess we'll have to wait and see. I think I would lean more toward the second thing you said, or kind of a resurgence of Michigan, showing that they can come back and do these things, and showing that they can get the talent they need and all that to make these kinds of runs. But it is also possibly, like you said, the end of one era, with Trey and possibly some other guys, which means that if that does happen, they're going to have to load up and do it again, and that becomes the hardest part of all when you're trying to establish yourself. Michigan, they're back to a point where. He has rebuilt the program. They're officially rebuilt. They're officially good again. They are a destination spot for kids. They're a team that you have to be reckoned with, and all those types of things. But if you want to get back to a level where you're doing that every year, or you're competing for that every year, where you're going to a national championship type game, that's hard, and you have to reload and redo it. But what Beilein wants with this thing is they want to be a team that can compete in the Big Ten for a title, and then make sure they're in the tournament every year in good position to make a run. And are they back to that position? Yeah, I think they are. I think that's where they're living at right now. You know, it is probably the end of one era for, you know, your best player, but you move forward. You had a good recruiting base. You're going to have better. You know, you're going to have better looks at recruiting down the road because of what you did this year. And you know, I think that they have built themselves a foundation on, you know, people, kids, parents, whoever. They understand, you know, what kind of coach I think John Beilein is, and that he's a guy that if you send your kid there, and your kid fits into what he's trying to do, and your kid is going to go to class and do all those things. If you send your kid there, he is absolutely 100% going to be a better basketball player when he's done. And not everyone can say that. If you look at some of these guys, you look at Trey Burke, you look at Tim Hardaway, you look at, you know, even Mitch McGarry, you know, Glenn Robinson. These guys came in and at the start of this season, at the start of their career, and they're nowhere near the player they are right now. I mean, and that's not everybody. Beilein is maybe one of the best coaches in America at taking an individual talent and getting every single last drop of it and making them better. And I think that's a chip that they put in their pocket and they'll use going forward. And I think because of things like that, you know, this program will be able to maintain itself and continue to compete for titles down the road.
Well, Nick, now that the season is over, the speculation, as we all know, is already starting as players have. I think it's until April 28th to declare for the NBA draft. So let's talk about a few of these guys and get your thoughts. Trey Burke, he's a goner, isn't he?
Yeah, I can't imagine any, you know, we all said that about Taylor Lewan, right? And he came back. But I think Trey's even more so. I just think there's nothing left other than a national title, which would be a huge accomplishment, a huge challenge. I just don't think there's anything left for him to do, quite frankly. And I don't think anyone could fault, you know, Trey for leaving. He'd be the top 5, top 7 pick. So I think he's absolutely going to go, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we all expect that and understand that. Let's talk about the other three, though. First, Tim Hardaway. Do you think he is really ready for the NBA?
You know, I go back and forth on Tim a lot because, you know, he's a guy that probably won't be a first-round draft pick, but will get drafted. Somebody will take him at some point. And then I look at it and say, okay, well, if he came back, would he be able to make himself a first-round draft pick? And I don't know, because I think Tim sort of is what he is, you know, to a degree. I think he's a player who, his position in the NBA, you know, and if we're going to look at this, you have to look at what they need in the NBA. Trey's position is a premium spot in the NBA. It's a premium position that people will pay a lot of money for, and they go out of their way to take breaches even on guys. Tim is a 6'6" guard who, that's everyone is a 6'2" guard in the NBA. So there's not a premium on Tim's position, and I just think his stock, I just don't know if it could get any better. I don't know if it could raise any higher with another year. I just wonder if he just kind of is what he is, and he'll be in the league. He'll make a roster. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind he'll be on a team. He'll get drafted, and maybe he's just one of those guys that just has to go about it as a second-round pick and finding his way in. You know, he's lived around the NBA his whole life. He knows how the league works. He understands it. I think Tim would be fine either way. I do think if you had to put a gun to my head and say, what's he going to do, I think I would be surprised a bit if he came back. Because, again, also in today's modern game, 4 years in college as a starter, playing every day, doing all this, and he started every day since he's been here. 4 years, that's a long time to do it for free. And, you know, I think I'd be a little surprised if Tim came back. But, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked if he came back either. So I think there's still a little bit of, we'll see, and maybe it'll depend on some other guys too.
I know what you're saying, too, when you say he is what he is, and there's probably maybe nothing he could do to bring his stock up next year. The one thing he could do if he did come back is his consistency issues are the one thing when you have watched him for the last 3 years that you worry about. I mean, those shooting funks that he goes in, but, I mean, he goes to the hole much better now. His complete game has really improved, and I think if he decided to stay, if he's going to bring his stock up, it would be in the sense that if he gives you a more consistent season, the tools are there, and then I think his stock would go up.
He could do it, absolutely. I mean, or things he could do. Like, he could come back and be a star of that team and be a guy who, like you say, Mike, if he plays consistent and averages 20 a game for a year, then yeah, I mean, I think he could bring stock up. But the other part of it is how high, how much higher could it really, really go? I mean, could Tim Hardaway Jr. ever be, just for the sake of like a top 15 draft pick? I don't see that, but he definitely could make himself some more money. But at the end of the day, you sit there and you kind of look at it, and I know, knowing his dad, who knows all of this stuff, they'll look at every single angle of it. And Tim will have the most prepared decision of anyone because his dad knows what's going on. I mean, his dad understands the entire process. And, last year there was speculation maybe Tim would go, and his dad put that to bed immediately, said there's no way, he's not ready. I think he also thinks that Tim mentally as an adult is also a little more ready and a lot more ready than he was last year. And that's a big part of it too. Don't ever underestimate that. Trey Burke is a 20-year-old kid who acts like he's 30. And last year he wasn't. He talked to his parents, and that was one concern where they wondered if mentally and as an adult, if Trey was ready to handle the lifestyle that is the NBA, which is a wild and crazy, thing every year. And now I think they understand, Trey grew up a ton in 1 year as a person. And that's, and that's also part of the Michigan thing rubbing off on him. But guys have to be ready as individuals to handle all that. And I think that if you have solid parents on your side, which all these guys do, that'll be a big, big factor in all their decisions.
Well, and another guy whose dad knows what the real deal is Glenn Robinson III, of course. And you wonder, is he ready, or do you think a little guidance from Dad will keep him around for another year?
He's the hardest one for me. All season long, he's been rated as ever since December, I think, he was rated as a guy who was probably going to be, a top 15 talent, somebody who's going to take a stretch on him, somebody who's going to take a chance, just because of what maybe he could blossom into. Because that's just what the NBA does. They draft on pure potential, and that's it. And, Glenn is 6'6", 6'7", and can do so many things athletically that maybe no one else in the country can do. And he's got a little bit of polish to his game, not a ton, but enough for them to take a chance. And I just keep thinking every time I see him, if he left, he'd be a top 15 draft pick. But could I see him playing in the NBA right now? Could I see him being a guy who's starting for a team, against 27-year-old men every night, playing 82 games, not getting tired, finding a way through it, and staying on a roster and not having to go through a stretch of you're on the bench for 2 seasons or you're in the D-League for a year and a half, and then you're fighting through it. And I have a really hard time with that because I don't know if that's not what would happen. Because now he shows his flashes of being of being a guy that could just dominate whoever he wanted whenever he wanted. But we also remember there were stretches with Glenn Robinson where he was just a ghost because he was either tired or physically he was out of it, or or maybe he was overwhelmed mentally by something or whatever it might be. Because Glenn is the youngest of all these guys. He's 19 barely, and he's just never gone through anything. Like this is the first real intense season he's ever had to go through. So you say to Glenn, physically he probably is ready, but mentally and everything else, and not to say that he's an immature kid because he's not. He's a very mature kid. But just to handle all the rest of that part of the game, I wonder, is he really ready to go? And, his dad's an interesting thing. They're very close, or his dad's obviously was a terrific player, and he was an NBA draft pick. He had a long, long career. But Glenn his parents are together, as everyone knows. Glenn is extremely close with his mother, and that's who raised him. Not to say that he's not close with his dad, but and it's funny that you say that because I think whatever his mom says is what's going to happen. Because I think it's one of those things I think a lot of us are like that, right? Wherever mom says goes. Yeah. But I would say, Glenn's dad could definitely give him a lot of advice that other kids' parents wouldn't be able to give him. But I think at the end of the day, whatever mom wants, that's what I think he's going to lean toward, because I know he thinks the world of her, and he doesn't want to do anything to disappoint or, whatever with his mom. So at the end of the day, I think, Glenn Robinson III's mom is going to have a big say in what he does moving forward.
Well, the last of the 4 guys that are in question is Mitch McGary, and it is just hard to remember anyone's NBA stock going from nowhere to a possible lottery pick in just a few weeks. Do you think, he's riding the wave right now, there's no doubt about it, but do you think Mitch is seriously considering and ready for the NBA?
Well, I think they're considering their options. I think that they're looking at everything. And they should, and I think everyone should in this spot. Don't get me wrong. I want to make that clear that when you talk about these types of things, it's hard because a lot of times people make judgments and they'll say, "Oh, he's not ready," or every one of these guys that is in a conversation should absolutely look into it, and that's what they're doing right now, and look in to see what they, what the advisory board tells them, and all of those things. As far as Mitch goes, he did explode, but it was one of those things where you knew, watching Mitch early in the season, doing little things here and there, but never piecing together a full game, you knew that if he ever did put everything together, then he would be one of these type of prospects because he is 6'10", and he is 255, 260 pounds, and he runs the way he does, and he handles the ball the way he does, and he can make jump shots, and he can play above the rim, and he literally can do everything. But he's only done everything for 5 games. It's one of those things where you say, is there enough tape? Is there enough, I know Chad Ford had him at number 12 on his draft board, and Chad Ford's the guy who talks to NBA general managers and things, and that's where he gets his information from. But he also said on there that NBA scouts are still just now finding Mitch McGary. They're just now seeing him. And so while he's exploded right now, if they go back and look at a full season, maybe he'll dip back down because they'll say, well, you did that for half of a month. What the hell happened the other 4 months of the season? So maybe we need to see more of this from you. Maybe you need to do this for a full season, and then we can decide. But if you're still, it's always whatever you want. It's whatever, I know Mitch likes school. I know he likes being in, all these guys do for the most part. They like being here. Mitch really likes the coaching staff. He likes his teammates. He's best friends with Glenn Robinson III. So maybe Glenn's decision has an impact on him too. But Mitch was a guy I thought that if Mitch came back and played that way for a full season, he could be the number 1 pick in the draft. But if he's projected to be top 12, that's how do you pass that up? So I mean, it's tough. Do I think he's probably ready to do it? Probably not. But that's not always what happens in the NBA, and it's one of those things that's just kind of the sour part of the game where guys are put in these positions that money's there, and it might not ever be there again. And I can't fault anyone for ever taking it one way or the other, but it'll be interesting. There's one guy in there, Trey Burke, who I think will be an absolute home run for an NBA team, and the other 3 would be kind of an up in the air. We'll see. And they could lose all 4, or they could lose just 1. I really don't know yet, and like you said, Mike, it's going to be April 28th will be the last day. I think we'll know before then, but you just never say never with this stuff, because it's just, you got to remember, in today's game, as much as these kids fall in love with the schools that they're at, and they love their coaches and they love their teammates, they want to play in the NBA. That's why they come to college. At the end of the day, that's the biggest reason. And when that dream looks like it maybe is about to come true, it's hard for them not to jump at it even prematurely, and sometimes that happens.
Well, Nick, you've been with this team all season, on the road, at home, in the locker room, and through the great tournament run. In the years ahead, when you look back on this season, what do you think will be your lasting memory of this team? And I know it's early to think about that, but, right off the top of your head.
Well, for me, because I was at every game, and I went through all that stuff, or I saw all that stuff. For me, the lasting memory will probably be all the different little things they had to go through, kind of, all the down points, that they overcame. I think if that makes sense. Like, not, Trey Burke's shot against Kansas was huge, and winning the national semifinal was huge, and just the run in general was big. But for me, it was more Ben Brust ripped your heart out, and you have to come back and play a basketball game again. And you did. Or, Jordan Morgan misses that layup at the buzzer, and you had to get ready to go to a Big Ten tournament, and you did. Or, you got embarrassed at Michigan State, and you had to come back and win a game, and you did. There were so many of those things that happened, and I've covered so many different basketball seasons over my career where those things happen to teams, and that's it. And their season, and Mike, honestly, it would be done. They would just say, forget this. If it happened twice, we're out of here. And they would just tank it, and the year would end, and they would never keep coming back. And the way that this team just kept coming back, they weren't perfect, but they always had that, that talent card to where you always thought they're always going to be in a game, no matter what. So it was, every game they absolutely could win the game. There was never a point where they were overmatched. There was never a point where they were, out of it before it started. And the fact they were able to kind of realize that is what I probably will remember the most. All of the different things, it felt like 3 seasons in one. It was so, and not because it was just so long, but because of all the little things they had to go through, that made them what they were. And, Beilein talked about it a lot, but it's true. If Ben Bruss misses that shot against Wisconsin, what happens to them? Maybe they don't learn that lesson. If they don't get pummeled at Michigan State, maybe they don't learn that lesson. Or if Penn State doesn't come back and do what they did to them, or Morgan's shot. What if it went in? There's so many different things that if those things didn't happen, then this team probably wouldn't have made it as far. And to me, that's always incredible. And that's part of the fun part about covering a full season, and seeing it all, because every game does mean something. There are very rare instances where something's a total throwaway. And, those games that you go to as a fan and you watch Michigan play Binghamton, there was something in that game that helped them get to the Final Four. It might have been for 30 seconds, but there was something there that helped them do that. And for me, it's always about the process, and that's what I enjoy watching the most. It's long and it's tiring, but that's always what I look back on, just the whole thing, as a whole.
Well, Nick, in the end, you always want to win the big one when you get there, fans, players. So everyone, they're understandably disappointed right now, but when you think about it, we got so much more from this team than we reasonably should have expected in the end, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. At the beginning of the year, they were top 5. They were ranked in the top 5, and people thought maybe they were a Final Four team, and I thought that was kind of nuts. I thought there was no way. They were too young and all that, and the stock answer. But they just kept staying there. They were a top 10. Fans should look back on this season and realize that their team was a top 10 team all season. It was number 1 in the country at one point. It was a team that, while you watched every game and you thought maybe you saw their flaws and you saw all the little things that maybe they weren't doing right, I'll tell you, every team they played, those fans were scared to death, because every game Michigan walked in the building, it was, this is a team with a ton of talent who could run us out of the building if we're not careful, and could win every game. They had a chance to win every game. Michigan State was the only one that was really a blowout, but they beat that team. So, there was never a moment where you said they were overmatched or they were over whatever, and that's very rare. So when you look back on it and you say they made the run they did, they were a terrific team with a lot of talent, a lot of big-time players, and a lot of big-time everything else. What else can you ask for? That's why, and if guys go pro, they go pro. This is what you brought them here for. You brought them here to make a run like this, and most fans, I think, enjoyed it. If they didn't enjoy it, then that's their own fault, and they'll have to live with that going forward. But I think that's part of today's game, and if guys do leave and they don't come back, then that's so be it. But you had this run. You're going to put a banner up in Chrysler that says Final Four 2013, and that you can't replace that. And that's an important thing.
Our guest on Michigan Game Day today has been Nick Baumgardner, who is the beat writer who has been there every step of the way for MLive with his great coverage. Nick, as always, it's a pleasure having you on the show. It's been great following your coverage all season, and there's still a lot more to do, so I'll have the link up in our show notes so folks can keep up with who's leaving and all of the news in Michigan basketball. So, as always, Nick, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Michigan basketball beat writer Nick Baumgardner from MLive for being our guest today and all season, helping us talk Michigan basketball. Coming up next on Wolverine Quick Hits, some of our closing thoughts on this week's national championship game. Here on the Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue, Michigan Wolverine. Wolverine Quick Hits today. As Nick said during the interview, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks leading up to April 28th. That is the deadline for players to declare for this year's NBA draft. We will keep you updated, of course, on what happens. Whatever happens, we know for certain there is one person coming back we cannot afford to lose. That is our head coach, John Beilein. Now, you remember 6 years ago he had plenty of doubters. Even 3 or 4 years into the job, Wolverine fans were openly questioning whether he was the right man to lead Michigan basketball back to relevance. That question no longer needs to be asked. Whatever happens in the coming weeks, we can rest assured we have the right man at the helm, and with his leadership, we'll be right back in the Big Ten title hunt next year and ready to go come tournament time next March. So rest assured, Michigan basketball is back, and I, for one, am already looking forward to next season. I'm also looking forward to some Wolverine football this weekend. The annual spring game is set to kick off at 12:30 Eastern Time and will be shown on BTN by delay on Saturday evening. Not a lot of news has come out of camp this year. What has come out has, sort of been a mixed bag. The young offensive line continues to develop well. Coach Madison has a boatload of inexperienced defensive linemen, but he's smiling about the size and the speed of those young men. Devin Gardner has looked good by all reports and is growing into his leadership role, according to Coach Brady Hoke. The bad news, backup quarterback Russell Bellamy probably out for the season with his ACL injury. So to say the least, even with hotshot Shane Morris coming in this summer, we are woefully thin at the quarterback position. Jake Ryan's ACL injury also was a devastating blow to the Michigan defense. All that aside, it's still Michigan football this Saturday. On next week's show, we'll recap the game and talk about the developments this spring and how things shape up as we head into that long waiting period between now and August 31st when we tee it up against Central Michigan. So don't forget to join us next week for our spring football recap show. Until then, I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Take care, have a great Wolverine week, and as always, go Blue. Thanks for listening to the Michigan Man podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine. You can find us on the web at www.gbmwolverine.com. That's www.gbmwolverine.com. For audio posts or other fan feedback, please call our listener line at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Email fan feedback to the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. That's the Michigan Man Podcast at yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast on GBMW Go Blue Michigan Wolverine is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan. The Michigan Man Podcast is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!